Well, I guess I'm the only one to have the PGP fingerprint up, but you know, we had Phil Zimmermann, so I felt it was appropriate. Okay, so thank you for the intro. You know, we've talked a lot about a lot of different topics so far. I'm going to be talking about proof of work, one particular area of proof of work. But I also heard travel rule mentioned a few presentations ago, and actually as part of my software contracting work, I've also done a bunch of work around travel rule for Shift Veriscope, which is an open source travel rule solution. So if you are afraid of travel rule or excited about it for some reason, we could have lots of interesting conversations there, but that's more on the regulatory and regulatory fintech side of things. So on the other side, though, is software development. So I'm going to talk about proof of work. I'm going to talk about web cache. And then I have a few parting thoughts that I call proof of work is all you need, and I think people are going to like that one. So no one yet has described what a hash function is. It's a one-way cryptographic hash function where you have an input, you get an output, but you can't go the other way. You can verify very quickly. That goes into proof of work in a moment. But here are some examples of hashes. These are hash functions, and these are examples of the results that you get when you hash an input to a hash function, in case no one has ever seen that before. When we talk about proof of work, here's a very simple example of proof of work. This is not, you know, the Bitcoin double SHA, you know, proof of work, of course. It doesn't have difficulty targeting or anything like that, but it's an example of iterating through a number to try to attach to an input to create a lower value numerically. So in the context of proof of work systems, we usually say that output 5 on the screen here is a better proof of work, you know, with more difficulty. So from the cypherpunk side of things, proof of work was, I believe, independently reinvented by Adam Back for the purpose of something he called hash cache. And hash cache was for mainly presented for email anti-denial of service countermeasure purposes. As many of you may remember, email had a really big spam problem, and so there were many proposals floating around for how to solve the email spam problem. I'll get into that in a moment. But essentially, the idea was with proof of work, you could have a computer spin some cycles, create a proof, and prove that the spam email had a certain cost associated with it, so that you would basically limit spammers' ability to create unlimited quantities of spam. Cool idea. So there were many proposals around that time for dealing with email spam, and no one quite knew what to do about it. In fact, there was a very common meme that was getting posted everywhere for quite a while about different alternative options for fighting spam. And this was posted all over the place, and people would fill it out, and they would just, they got tired of making up new reasons why a anti-spam solution wouldn't work, and so they just wrote all the common reasons, and it turns out it applies to most possible solutions you could imagine. So on this one, yeah, one complaint is, well, your solution is interesting, but it's defenseless against brute force attacks. So that's an interesting one. Or, you know, Microsoft would never go along with it. But it turns out Microsoft actually kind of did go along with Hashcash, but they made their own Microsoft implementation of Hashcash, which I believe was incompatible. So they kind of went along with it, I guess. Or the police won't put up with it. Or it requires cooperation from everyone all at once. Sound familiar? Sounds like Consensys to me. There were other ones, though, like, for example, your plan fails to account for the lack of popularity of strange new forms of money. People would propose, well, what if we use digital currency and made email expensive? Just all sorts of different reasons. And then finally, at the end of it, you can check an extra box saying, I don't like you. So stop proposing that idea. Good times. Unfortunately, email spam has not actually been solved. I think Hashcash was an interesting idea that we should have, you know, implemented more widely. So denial of service attacks is one reason for Hashcash. I mean, nowadays you see reCAPTCHA everywhere, and the human jigsaw puzzle, and, you know, the identifying different images and such. Proof of work is still an available option that we could be using there. Cyber resistance is another property that proof of work can provide, where you make it costly to generate new anonymous identities in a system. Another way to describe proof of work, though, was provided by Andrew Polstra and Blockstream, dynamic membership multi-party signatures. And so the concept was, you can think of a cryptographic signature, which is usually generated from a key, to produce a signature that can be validated against a message in the signature. And instead, with proof of work, though, you can have a dynamic signature where it doesn't matter who is participating in it, as long as you're generating proof of work. And so you can think of it as a dynamic membership set, because the set is unbounded. Anyone could join, anyone can do proof of work. And it produces a signature, which is essentially something you can validate very quickly through proof of work. So anyway, that's an interesting way of explaining proof of work. But there's been lots of other ways of explaining it, though. People often talk about, well, you know, it's work. That's the most obvious way to describe it because it's in the name, proof of work. But you often hear it's really difficult mathematical equation solving. You know, you hear that one a lot, or it's solving puzzles, or, you know, we call it mining. Or we talk about, like, well, it's imposing a cost for doing reorgs on the blockchain, and it's like a minimum physical cost of energy or something for rewriting the blockchain. But yeah, I mean, there's lots of different ways to explain proof of work. I just found it kind of interesting just how many different ways there are. It doesn't seem like as an ecosystem or ecosystem of ecosystems, we've come to a single way of explaining it, even though fundamentally a hash function is somewhat simple as a primitive. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is a very simple point, which is that mining is actually fun. But more specifically, mining is really fun, and what people don't remember is what mining was like in the beginning of Bitcoin. At the very beginning, you could open up your Bitcoin wallet, and you could mine on your CPU. There have been another few cryptocurrencies where you've been able to do this over time, but it's very, very rare. And people's experience with mining lately is not of the CPU on the desktop variety. And I think that this is a disservice to the whole venture of cryptocurrency. The ability for anyone to spin up a new computer and start doing proof of work mining to mint tokens and generate cryptocurrency and digital currency on your own without asking for permission from anyone is a really fascinating thing. And in my experience, and based off of asking others, people find it really fun. And I think when you find something that is that fun and that interesting and novel, you're onto something. And it's unfortunate that that experience just isn't widely available anymore. Yeah, as I mentioned, permissionless, anyone in the world can do proof of work. It's really interesting. It shares a lot of similarities with, on the permissionless level at least, how anyone can generate your own keys, and then people can send you coins. That's great. So I'm going to take a bit of a detour to introduce webcache real quick. So electronic cache was invented in 1982, essentially, by David Chaum, who invented a private form of eCache. Based off of a centralized design. It was commercialized into a company called DigiCash. There were a number of other eCache related systems being proposed at the time, but DigiCash was one of them. And in fact, DigiCash ended up being used by banks. However, we're not all using Chaumian eCache right now. So what happened? There are various stories as to what happened, but in my opinion, one of the things that happened was that the way that eCache was launched, essentially, was that each bank would have its own eCache server or mint, and my understanding is that the eCache tokens were not able to be spent between the different banks, and so online, if you were at a merchant, you would have to use their eCache from their bank, which hinders adoption tremendously. So I think that was kind of an interesting go-to-market flaw, but it kind of makes sense if you're at the dawn of the internet and you're doing electronic cash and you think, well, we'll go to the banks because that's where the dollars are. We can have one token be $1 or something. That kind of makes sense to go to the banks. Anyway, Hal Finney had his own reusable proof of work system, used proof of work, had a central server, hardware security module, would sign messages to basically make the proof of work reusable. So that was really interesting. Then Bitcoin happened. I'm not going to go into the particulars, but proof of work, blockchain, consensus, using proof of work to secure the network, all that. And so from my experience on Bitcoin, I spent a lot of time telling people that your idea is dumb and you don't need a blockchain for it. And I got tired of actually saying that to the point where I decided to just go ahead and build an example of what I mean. And that is webcache, and it's at webcache.org. It is a proof of work digital currency, mined with proof of work, but there is no blockchain. What does that mean? Well, it means there's a central server, and the purpose of the central server is solely to detect double spending. And so wallets communicate to the central server and ask, is a token still valid? A token here is essentially like a private key or a secret serial number. It's a secret, something you keep secret. It's like eCash, it's like Chaumian eCash, but one big difference is that there's no Chaumian blinding. Yeah, I operate the server. I built it pretty quickly. It's really simple. It's really fast. You know, it can scale up to millions of transactions per second. You don't go to the server, though, to send web cache. To send web cache, what you do is you copy and paste it to whoever you're sending it to. So you do that over email, chat, whatever it is. Yeah, so as I mentioned, no blockchain. Miners, you know, are creating this web cache using proof of work. I think this is the only implementation of proof of work for a digital currency not using a blockchain right now. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, I think that it's good for people to experiment with different designs and different potential systems. Proof of work has a lot to offer, even beyond Bitcoin and proof of work-based blockchains. So I would encourage people to really consider, you know, different ways of organizing software and finance to really see what we can come up with. Oh yeah, this was a diagram of a flow chart where where people kept asking, you know, well, let's, you know, put movies on a blockchain, and, you know, you answer, well, you don't need a blockchain for that, or let's put images on the blockchain, and, well, you don't need a blockchain for that. You know, you don't need 20 million X redundancy on your data. Certainly if you're not paying for it. But nonetheless, you could still do it. It's just, you know, it's done. One interesting thing on web cache is that you can still do CPU mining. So if you've missed out on CPU mining and you want to try it out, you can just go download the web cache miner. Yeah, I think, you know, everyone should try it for at least some cryptocurrency, at least once, to like understand what it was like to just be able to generate money from your existing computer hardware. It's really cool. And other people say so as well. Here's collected praise. You know, one of the highest praises is, it's not just another copy-paste altcoin. Thank you. Anyway, one thing to note is that if you are interested in that, in web cache in particular, there has been a proposal from a community member to change the supply schedule. So if you're interested in that, you know, I'd love feedback just to get people's impressions on how that should work and everything. Thanks. Now, one final thing I'd like to talk about is I've been thinking about proof of work for a while now, and web cache, you know, uses proof of work, no blockchain, pretty weird concept, I know. And given all the problems that we've had with blockchains between scalability and just you know, regulatory problems and all sorts of stuff, you know, I got to thinking, you know, is there another way of doing digital currency entirely? You know, web cache is pretty cool, but it does have that central server, which is kind of unfortunate. Naively, the really cool thing to be able to do is like, what if we could just do proof of work, generate some tokens, and then send them to someone without a central server and without a blockchain? And unfortunately, that doesn't work, because that naive solution, essentially you could copy and paste the generated proof of work token, and so therefore it wouldn't be a good currency, right? That doesn't work. But I've been thinking about it, and I think, and this is kind of half-baked, so bear with me, there's no implementation of this. It's kind of out there, I admit. But I think you can do a digital currency just with proof of work. No blockchain, no central server. But it's not the proofs, though, that are valuable. It's actually hash rate, and in particular the ephemeral instantaneous hash rate that is valuable. So you can have buyers of hash rate, sellers of hash rate, anyone could generate hash rate. You could proxy hash rate through multiple nodes. I think of proof of work as like a physically unclonable computational resource, which is where Bitcoin derives its security and value from, is from that mining. And so, you know, I got to thinking, well, is there another way of using proof of work to have that unclonable element that is usually unavailable in digital systems? Because in digital systems, we can copy things endlessly, right? And in fact, even with proof of work, once I do a proof of work, I can copy that proof endlessly, right? So the value is not in the proof. The value is actually in the interaction of telling the miner what to mine, or deciding on what to mine, or other things like that. Like in Bitcoin, it's the consensus around what to mine. But in a hash rate-based currency without a blockchain, it would be peer-to-peer. It would be directly to peer-to-peer without a server. And anyway, work in progress. I think it's interesting, and if anyone else does too, then I'm happy to talk about it. That's it. Just want to leave it on a note that mining is supposed to be fun, and if you're finding it difficult and frustrating, then I think that it doesn't have to be. I think that mining can be really fun. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Bryan. I think that was such a fun talk. And I also would encourage everybody, I mean, I know the bear market sucks, but one thing that it has come up with is cheap ASICs. And I know a lot of folks have been experimenting with like home heating. I used it to dry mushrooms, regular mushrooms, chanterelles, not magic mushrooms. But the point is there's like all these creative things that we can try to figure out. And people, on Twitter and in other forums are experimenting. So I'm finding that like people are finding again the joy of mining. And I think it's important. So thank you for bringing back to light that it can be a joy.